Greetings, listeners. Welcome to How the World Should Work, the podcast with a purpose, where we talk about things that actually matter. This is your host speaking, author, journalist, and otherwise aimlessly wandering millennial, Matt Shao. I'll be hosting alongside my good friend Johnny here. As many in my generation can probably relate to, and many who aren't, I spent several years after college trying to navigate the endlessly frustrating world of business to carve out what I was told was a successful life for myself. 6 years in the insurance industry, followed by a year of owning a small business, made me feel like I was on a decent track. Until August the 4th, 2015, when my world was turned upside down. That was the day I lost my mother and best friend, and suddenly every priority of mine completely shifted. I began to look at life from a totally different angle, and as a result, decided to drop everything and pursue writing. A dream my mother had pushed me towards my entire life, but one I was always too scared to chase. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm now a published author, a columnist at my local newspaper, an ever-growing blogger, and now we have a podcast. Which brings me to the point at hand. Here you'll be listening to topics pulled from various themes and motifs from my main writing project, the Continuity series. Although the primary purpose, as with any work of fiction, is to entertain, it also serves as a platform to express many of the thoughts and feelings we all seem to have with this crazy world we're living in. From deeper issues like social equality to lighter things such as modern dating, we'll be covering a wide array of things that we all seem to think about but don't seem to talk about very frequently. So with all that said, allow me to introduce our co-host, Mr. Gentleman Johnny Wiggins.
My name is Jonathan Wiggins. I've decided to join this project because I truly believe in what it stands for. Our goal here isn't to use this as a soapbox, so all you can just hear us talk. Instead, we hope that by talking about these issues, we can help create a better awareness of the things that affect our lives. By talking about these issues that we otherwise tend to ignore, I think we'll get a much better understanding of them, which can help us apply this newfound understanding to our lives in a meaningful way.
Okay, episode 4. We are going to talk about terrorism. We're going to have an open discussion on terrorism. We're going to look at it from a historical point of view. I know a lot of people associate these days religion with terrorism, but we're going to discuss how it's not necessarily a religious component as much as it is political. But first, the way that this relates to the Continuity series in terms of terrorism and the different belief systems that we're going to be talking about, that's really the point. I mean, the three main players in the book, Carson Urey and President O'Hare, and actually I'm just going to read an excerpt. I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything, but from the epilogue, the last chapter after everything's happened. But it isn't often when someone comes around that has such a broad vision. In the case of Carson Urey and O'Hare, they all have their own views of how the world should operate. The only commonality they share is that they all agree the current system isn't one that benefits humanity as a whole. On the one hand, you have President O'Hare, who believes that humanity is a group of mostly unintelligent worker bees just trying to get by one day at a time. Easy to control, easy to manipulate, easy to suppress. Then there's Urey, a young man who has risen up from nothing, who values strength and hard work, making no excuses for failure or setbacks. He's relentless in his Machiavellian beliefs that only the strongest should survive. And finally, we have Carson, a person who believes in true independence where people are free to do anything they wish. A person who believes that the vast majority of people are inherently good and that evil only exists as a result of our selfish natural instinct to boost our own egos. It's his firm belief that if humanity can put ego aside, incredible things can be accomplished as a collective unit. He wants more than anything to see that reality manifest itself, a day where humankind wakes up and realizes how petty their differences really are, and that the only way to transcend these childish conflicts is to grow up and stop being so self-absorbed. So that's how the whole point of view, and that's what we're going to be discussing. That's how thematically, like I said, this applies, because we're going to be talking about vastly conflicting worldviews. I mean, it doesn't get much higher level than your religious beliefs and the way you believe literally society and people should function. So I want to make an announcement. How the World Should Work is now an official nonprofit organization. We have a charter now with the state of Tennessee, and I am waiting on the IRS to get back our paperwork on the 501c3 charitable organization classification, which is probably going to take about 12 years knowing the IRS, but it is what it is. So we're excited about that, and we have a lot of plans with other organizations and other people involved that we're going to bring to you guys in the near future. So, but back to the topic at hand, terrorism. So as always, we're going to start out. I have two quotes here that I want to begin with that apply to this, and the first is by Howard Zinn, and it goes like this: "How can you have a war on terrorism when war itself is terrorism?" That's kind of a philosophical thing I wanted to add in here. But the second one is by Asad al-Mohammed, who is I believe he's a Muslim author. And he said, "You are there, and to their ears, being Assyrian sounds like you're unclean, shameful, and indecent. It's like you owe the world an apology for your very existence." And that is a sentiment I think that's going to come up in this discussion. I know, particularly with the audience here in America and in the Western world, we have, for the most part, a particular point of view when it comes to Islamic extremism. But there's always two sides to any story, and that's one thing, here I try to be mindful of, and we'll never solve any problem without understanding the point of view of the people that hold the opinion that we disagree with. So, but our first point here is in a historical account and look at terrorism, how it's developed, and different accounts throughout history. So the first thing that we could find in terms of terrorism, it actually originated, and this, to be perfectly honest, was a simple Google search. There's tons of material out there if you want to, and I recommend you do the research just to get informed on all this. But it actually began 1st century AD with Sicarii zealots. And let me introduce, first of all, actually, Chad Grindstaff. He's our guest today. Will is here again. He's been on a couple other episodes, and his brother Michael is here as well. So thank you guys for joining us. But so what did you guys learn about that? I know we sent out the template first. Does anybody want to start off with that, with kind of a historical view on that, or what are your?
I didn't know anything about the Sicarii before this, to be completely honest. I knew about the group that comes right after them, the assassins, where we get the word assassin from. But the Sicarii themselves, I didn't know anything about.
So they were Jewish.
They were Jewish, and they weren't really. I mean, they were terrorists in the loose form of the term that, like, you could put that, like, a Union soldier would say a Confederate soldier was. In that they were the Jews that stood up against the Roman government in Jerusalem and the Israel state at that point. So they were the ones that had, and they actually get their names from their weapons. The Sicarii, Sicca is the Roman word, or I guess Latin word for a small curved blade.
A dagger, right?
A dagger, yeah. And they would use small blades that they would carry underneath their clothing that were easy to conceal, so they could assassinate people if they wanted to.
So what did they do? Like, and I'm actually looking it up right now, to classify as terrorism. So and actually I want to mention the definition, according to Merriam-Webster, of terrorism is this: the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. So what did the Sicarii, the OTs, if you will, the original terrorists, what did they do to fall under that?
What would put them under that is that they attacked mainly at religious ceremonies, religious festivals, stuff like that. So where people were really, they were there for a reason. They were there to worship. They were there to, I guess since it was Romans, they were at the temples of the gods. And Jewish people wouldn't have necessarily believed in Zeus and Hades and all them. So they were there to, that's how they caused their, they didn't have planes and bombs and stuff like that to use. So they just used the random cold-blooded murder as their form of terror.
So they that makes sense, because a lot of terrorism, I think, is it's not, because I mean, if you're looking at it from kind of a political point of view, you could call it war if you have a purpose for killing the people. But it sounds like these assassinations were kind of targeting people not necessarily involved in the the disputes. And just reading the old trusty Wikipedia article, it's saying. They attacked Romans, Hebrew Roman sympathizers, blending into crowds after deeds to escape detection. Assassin's Creed kind of stuff here. Exactly that's what we're talking about.
That sounds very Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, that's very Assassin's Creed. A little shout out to who developed them? Ubisoft. Yeah, Ubisoft. Thank you guys. Unbelievably writing the writers for that series. Incredible. Shout out there. But okay, so moving on after them, that was the. But then the first time the term terror was actually used was during the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror. Do either of you guys or any of you guys know anything on the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and how that term came about, or why?
So I just found good old Wikipedia again that the Reign of Terror lasted from 1793 until the fall of Robespierre in 1794. So roughly 6 months to a year of terror within France.
And what was his name?
Robespierre.
Robespierre. And was he like the instigator of the revolt?
Yes.
Okay.
It was the whole point of it was to purge France of enemies of the revolution and protect the country from foreign invaders, because during the revolution they became weak, and Spain or say Holland could have come down and invaded any time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. And another point here, that was political. The Sicarii zealots were religious. It sounded like.
Yeah, for sure.
So that is a point here, and I guess I should mention this too. This entire conversation we're about to have, there's one question I would like to be in the back of our minds, and because the point of this is, and the whole point of our organization, how the world should work, is to discuss these things and then try and identify and at least get the dialogue going. That's that's really the only mechanism right now that we have at our disposal, but to try and identify ways that things could possibly change. Things that that cause terrorism, things, the motives behind it, and, getting into the mind of a terrorist, finding out what's driving them, why do they do these things, And that's really the only way, I think, we throw sticks and stones with all this, drone strikes and all these things, and all we're doing, to be perfectly honest, is making these people even more mad. That's, the first debating 101, with any argument is, they teach you not to antagonize your opponent's points of view, which I don't know what the definition of antagonizing is, but a bomb to me is pretty much saying, hey, we don't agree with you, you're wrong. So yeah, I mean, and we see that response, that violent response to that. So that's one thing I think I want to have, like I said, in the back of our minds is what could we do to help this problem, to improve it. But so one thing, and then the other thing is I want to have, be mindful of the political motive versus the religious motive, and is there kind of a fine line between the two and a bridge or a gap. But so most modern accounts, I think, we've talked a little bit about a very, very rough overview of some historical accounts here, and there's a slew of them. One of the main ones I know is the Christian Crusades, some people refer to as a version of terrorism. That's not a mentality that a lot of Westerners like to, or Christians particularly like to adopt, but that is the conflicting point of view. When you say there's radicals, Islamist, terrorisms or whatnot, or extremists, one of their first, comebacks is, the Crusades. So
yeah, I think the softest way to put that is that a lot of people academically would agree that the Crusades were definitely a dark period for the Christian faith.
And that, again, being open-minded is the main thing. We have to admit that we all have our predispositions, and the ability to admit things like that is the key to open discussion. So, but Chad, what are your thoughts just in general? I know you have you're very like I said, impassioned individual. You've got very good points on all the discussions I've seen with you. What are your thoughts, just in general, on terrorism? So, let's start off with your background. So, you are a pastor, right?
Yes.
Okay, so a Christian pastor, and you've done, I know, a lot of research into terrorism, and primarily, would you say the majority of kind of your knowledge base on it is more religiously oriented, or would you say it's politically, or kind of both?
As far as how I see it or how I think it manifests itself?
Both. Either one. Let's start off with the
it's,
second one. How do you think it manifests itself?
Well, I think religion itself, a dangerous thing about religion is it can breed an apathetic nature out of people. There's a lot of doom and gloom in all religion, and it's because it deals with purity. So if you're dealing with purity, you're going to be dealing with impurity, and there's a lot of impurity if you're using those definitions, and it can really inspire some apathy. So in that sense, without going too far into it right off the bat, I think I can kind of see maybe how that religion could inspire terrorism. Mm-hmm. Politically speaking, I think I have my own. I do believe in a right and a wrong. I don't claim to know what it is all the time. Just maybe some of the time would be good for me. But politically speaking, terrorism it very well could be something that is subjective.
Right.
To,
yeah. Definitely.
Who it's being done
it's
to.
in the eye of the beholder kind of deal, right? Yeah. Do you think that there's an overlap between political and religious terrorism?
Yes.
You do? Okay. I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would say so.
What do you guys think? Michael, what are your thoughts, just in general? I think it's good to get our viewpoints out.
Yeah.
Just in general, for terrorism in general.
Yeah, what do you think about it? Is it let's focus mainly on modern, because it's applicable to our lives. So modern terrorism, majority of what we deal with nowadays is pretty much Islamic. I mean, there's the isolated, incident with Dylan, the guy in the church in what was it, South North? Yeah. So like that, let's not say that it's only Islamic extremism. The majority of it, though, if you look at most accounts, at least with what we deal with in the Western world, is Islamic extremism. So, what are your thoughts, Michael, on just in general?
Yeah, I see modern terrorism as more of a cycle now, because what's happening is that there are several terrorist groups who are also supporting local people, like Hamas, for building churches and schools. It was for them in giving jobs, but for also a terrorist group because for doing bombings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of if there's a kid who gets helped by a terrorist, the kid is going to look up to a terrorist.
Right.
But then if that terrorist dies, the kid is going to be okay, I want revenge. So he's going to become another terrorist.
He's going to pick up the reins and
he's going to lead the.
Yeah, so okay. I get what you're saying then. As it's a cycle.
Yeah.
It's a continuous just based on. Yeah, it's really with any culture, I guess. Really, that's what we do. We hand down our ideals and our philosophies to the next generation. So you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's I mean that in and of itself kind of tells us why it's something that's not going anywhere. It's a culture.
Yeah.
That point of view, and that's But I would say let's try to identify the main disconnect. And I want to reference what you said, Chad. And you said that you believe there was a right and a wrong, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And because if we had a terrorist, if we had Ahmed, the dead terrorist, have you seen that?
Yeah.
If he was sitting here with us, he would probably say, I'm not a terrorist. I am whatever, and he would justify it, right? And we mentioned earlier, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So
he would just call
how do we identify the right from the wrong? Who's to say? The point is, who's to say that what they're doing is bad? And I know that's a ridiculous question to most people, but I'm trying to make a point here. So who's to say? Who is the authority there, and how do we identify what is right and what's wrong? Well, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
On how to identify what's right and what's wrong?
Yeah.
I think there's a pretty basic way. I mean, in my opinion, right and wrong can be seen through common sense eyes. I would not have instructed 2 planes full of people to have rammed into 2 towers full of innocent people. I wouldn't have waged war on random innocent people. Like,
Devil's advocate. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I have to
ahead.
interject. But to be devil's advocate, though, when you say
To
common,
them,
what is
yeah,
common?
okay,
That
yeah,
it goes
yeah.
back to there's a layer that you got to peel back and peel back. What's common sense to you? They would say common sense to them is
Would
what
be
their
the-
God tells them.
Right, yeah.
And that's the obvious way that we need to live our lives. So how do we that's my point. And I think I'll answer it myself. I think it's the golden rule. I mentioned it last episode.
Yeah.
Always treat people the way you want to be treated. It's common sense in any culture, and I don't care what doctrine you believe in. It's common sense to not want to be bombed, to not want to be terrorized, right?
Right.
So if you don't want to be terrorized, you shouldn't be terrorizing other people. You shouldn't be oppressing other people. That, to me, is the way to identify right and wrong. What do I want to have happen to me and my family and my loved ones? It's really that simple, in my opinion. What do you think, Chad?
There's so many different routes to take there as far as like the golden rule and geopolitics. That's a large one to tackle, I think, if that's what you're talking about.
Let's isolate it to just the right and wrong. Just how do you define that?
I don't like making arguments from authority because it's not good political.
What do you mean by authority?
Like, for instance, from I believe in a God,
Right.
And I can't. Like, for instance, if I didn't, I would be pretty nihilistic. Just myself. I'm not saying people who don't believe in God are nihilistic. My own self, I've kind of gone down a path of, who am I to say what is right, what is wrong, and ultimately, the foundation of my perception of what is right and wrong always fell on the foundation of a God, a bigger plan.
Right. Right.
In other words, not in other words, but because outside of that, what is the significance of Earth in general?
Yeah.
It's
Which would
really
lead one to
not.
believe they're nihilists. I mean, because that's a point. If you have, so you're saying, do you agree in that case? Just so I understand, do you agree with that authoritative kind of presence, or do you think that right and wrong, morals, ethics should come from within the individual? So you're saying you do subscribe to the God argument with this is right, this is wrong. Is that just so I can understand?
If I'm understanding you right, maybe I think when you said common sense, I thought of the founding literature of we find these things self-evident.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
However, that idea wasn't necessarily easy to come by. Things that were self-evident, and so it's I don't know. It's a difficult question.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm trying to, so I'm trying to, because I know, obviously, with your religious background, that is kind of so with the convictions you have with Christianity, what do you think? I mean, Islamic people are coming from kind of a similar point, only, I would argue, in my opinion, their actions, just like the Crusades, aren't self-evidently right, So what do you think? Do you think that, because they would have, like I said, I wish we had, a Guantanamo guy here just kind of explain his, because I would love to get in his mind and hear his rebuttals.
Something real quick I think we need to check ourselves on is we keep saying, and I just want to do this to try and play as even level playing ground as we can from a political standpoint.
Right.
We keep saying Islamic people and kind of blanketing it over everybody when we're referencing the Islamic terrorists.
Extremists. I guess we should
Extremists
say,
would be
yeah.
a better way to put it, because it really is kind of a small group of them that is there's over 1 billion Islamic people out there. They aren't all.
Let's solve that real quick.
Yeah.
When we mentioned, by the way, just a preface here, a precursor, Islamic, what we're referring to in the context of terrorism is the extremists. When we understand statistically, what is it? I mean, if you 2% maybe,
No,
or
it's like 0.0001.
0.02. Okay, yeah, we understand that that's a very small portion of the populace. And we were talking earlier. I read the Quran. You've probably read, whatever.
I've read a passage or two.
I've read some of it too.
So it is a beautifully written book. What I will say that. But so we just want to make sure that's clear that we aren't isolating a blanketed group of people.
We aren't generalizing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we are referring. I mean, and this is, but it is a big problem.
Yeah.
I don't want to water down the gravity and the magnitude of the issue. Granted, it's coming from a very small portion of the population. Michael, what do you think? Right and wrong.
I say it's like right and wrong should be based on more of like what sort of like gets you happiness, gets you to a point of being happy. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants their families to be safe and like well fed and secured and happy and like have some place to live. Because that's the ultimate human goal, is to be happy.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to like going and lusting after people or doing like mindless manslaughter, because that's not really happiness. That's just going through
Psychopathy.
Yeah. That's just going through other emotions like anger and like sadness. So
kind of an inherent pursuit of happiness, and you're
Yeah.
saying in general, in your opinion, you think most people inherently kind of desire
Yeah.
coalescence and community and validation and whatnot. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I guess the sticky part gets into in that case when people would argue that they derive happiness again from the extremist point of view, like they derive happiness from pleasing Allah, and the mechanism of doing that is to blow up random people at an Ariana Grande concert. Speaking of which, along the brand, How the World Should Work, I read an article, and I wish I had the details right now. This is a total off-topic point, but there was a guy, when that bomb went off at the concert, a homeless guy.
A homeless man, yeah.
That ran towards the bomb, and this is obviously in Manchester, and he ran towards the bomb, and from what I think, if I remember correctly, there was a guy, some rich guy in the UK or whatever, bought him a house, and the homeless guy helped, people getting out of the whatever, to escape from the danger, but a guy bought him a house. I think he gave him a lot of money.
They're paying like
maybe
6 months of his rent or something like that. They
a
gave
car,
him a job.
right?
He's got job offers. He's
Yeah.
got
So
the
I
Good
thought,
Samaritan truly got rewarded. In this.
yeah, that was
he really
that's
did.
how the world should work, man. That's awesome. I thought that was really cool.
And it was great watching him on the video, because he was just like, well, I mean, what would you have done? Like, it's a bunch of kids that got bombed. You just gonna run away from them? Like, no, I saw a bunch of suffering kids, and I went and I helped them. Like,
To him,
he's
that's
a genuinely
the
good
quote
person.
self-evident, but sadly,
Right.
a lot of people, and obviously a lot of people in that instance, ran the other
They
way.
did. I mean, you kind of got to think about it.
Instinctually.
If you're part of it, because he wasn't necessarily at the epicenter of it. A lot of those people, if you're at the heart
Right.
of it, your probably first instinct's going to be to run.
Well, self-preservation is the
Yeah,
first,
yeah.
which
he kind of stood on the outs, but he even mentions pulling nails out of kids and stuff. Like,
Wow,
yeah,
really?
like,
Dang.
that was
that whole fight or flight response.
yeah, adrenaline.
one
kicks
would
in,
argue,
boom.
what does he have to lose? I guess in some cases,
Probably one way he thought about it.
Well,
like,
there's- There's a difference between. I was like, there's like you have a soldier who's on the field, then you have a satellite giving him intel. It's a lot more calm to be able to see what's going on.
Yeah.
When you're in the middle of it, it's pretty disorienting.
Right,
First
yeah.
thing you're trying to think is like, okay, what's happening? How do I stay alive?
Yeah.
And the people with you are be lucky if you're thinking of them.
right.
Plus, coming right out of an explosion like that, you do have the physical sensation of the blast. The concussion gets you, and kind of it's like you're waking back up, sort of.
Yeah, that's crazy,
So,
man.
He was,
I guess
he was on the outside of that. He didn't have to. He just.
I bet you learn a lot about yourself in those situations.
I'm sure you do,
It's
yeah.
like the instinct thing like that. I got held up 2 years ago at gunpoint. A guy took my wallet and stuff. And normally I would have thought, like, that's one of those things you're like, oh, I would have done this, whatever. Dude, I didn't say a word. He stood. It was a 17-year-old kid. He was like, he must have done it before because he was like 10 yards away, not close enough. If I'd have been like a MMA guy, like
take the gun out of his hand.
like whatever, dude. Joke's on you. But he looked at me. He was like, "Toss me your phone and your wallet." So obviously I complied. And then when he took it, and I don't know why I said this. It was really dumb in hindsight. But I was like, you do realize that, like, find my iPhone. The first thing I'm gonna do is go to BP, call the cops, and like track it. So just heads up.
So there you go.
But like in hindsight, like if I had pissed that guy off,
he'd have shot.
He'd have shot me.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why, and I didn't think about it. I didn't even like remember it when it happened. But that's the kind of thing. It's like the bomb goes off. Do you run towards it? You know, we all want to think we know what we would do, but you never do.
Think
we'd
like
be the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one thing, I think the next thing I want to get into is this whole empathy thing and understanding the motives and the purpose. And this is going to delve into sort of the religious talk and political talk and whatnot. But why do terrorists? Because like I said, there's a lot of moving parts with this,
right?
And a lot of them have different reasons. If you read different accounts and motives or whatnot. But in general, what do you think the prevalent purpose and reason or motivation behind terrorism is? Extremism, again.
Are we sticking with? Well, okay. First, I'm going to say, like, I think it depends on who's carrying out the terrorism. Because if you have an Islamic terrorist, like terrorist group, like or organization, I used to say, like Al Qaeda or
Hezbollah,
how do you pronounce it?
ISIS, take your pick. You know,
exactly. There's plenty of them. They're doing it for, yes, they want to spread they want to have their religion be in charge of the governments, and
Let me pause you there.
Okay.
Because that's a point. Do you think that that's the case, or do you think that a lot of them turn to that because they don't have opportunity anywhere else in society?
I think we can go back to what Michael said earlier about because Al Qaeda, for instance, like Michael said, a lot of them were helping people. It popped up in the 1980s to help Afghanistan fight off the Soviets.
Okay.
It popped up as a military organization to help defend its country.
Right.
And and they had their specific reasons for being against, like, America, because we did support their enemies in general, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia. We supported some of their enemies, so that did kind of turn them off a little bit towards us, but also just our general ideologies were so, I guess, blatantly different and conflicting that it did eventually turn into them becoming a terrorist organization and just kind of existing for the main purpose of blowing stuff up.
Yeah, so it evolved, you're saying, into well, that's the thing. Why? But how did that happen? Like, there's got to be, and I don't know if you're familiar with the doctrine, but how did they decide that was the right thing to do? And that's one thing I want to reference here is in the Quran, which is their doctrine, right? Chad, and I don't know if you know anything about this, Chad, but particular passages maybe, and like I said, reading the thing, it's very, I don't want to call it inconsistent, but I can understand how it's been interpreted in different ways.
Right.
Based upon the tone and the language and the statements that are made by Muhammad. So, what do you think made them turn to the aggressive, violent passages?
I think it's people that I don't even necessarily. I don't honestly think there are any real aggression because all the passages that people are pulling from, I went through and I kind of combed through the most common ones that people cherry pick and use in context of violence and all this with the Islamic faith. And if you go through and you read these, I mean, we say that these scriptures are open to be interpreted however you want, but I do believe there are some things that when they're written the way they're written, it's pretty obvious to go, well, that's clearly what that means, and you can't really dispute it because there it is in black and white in front of you. Like the ones that a lot of people reference when they're trying to say they're violent or whatever, and there are two groups they like to say that say that they're that the Quran teaches the terrorism, and that would be anti-Muslim pundits or people who are very against, I guess, the Muslim faith, and then extremists are going to tell you that the Quran teaches terrorism. But in all honesty, it doesn't. Like the ones they're pulling from, I've got them written down. I don't have
The
it
passages?
written down. Well, I don't have the passages written down, but like the Quran 2240, I guess that'd be the book and the chapter. The permission to fight is given to them. The permission to be violent is only given to them in an act of. Here, I can bring it up for you if you're trying to.
I'm trying to get
in an act of self-defense. So it says. Permission to fight is given to those against whom war is made, because they have been wronged, and Allah indeed has power to help them. So it even goes on later to say that if your opponent, asks for mercy or says, I surrender, I submit, the Islamic fighter is to stop and give them mercy and not continue the fight. They're to allow the surrender. So the Quran goes right. See, here it is, pulled up right here.
Permission to fight, this is a quote from the book, permission to fight is given to those against whom war is made, because they have been wronged, and Allah indeed has power to help them.
It approves of self-defensive fighting. The aggressive fighting, it's not all for.
Okay. Give me that article for the 5. So I want to identify, while we're talking about this, because like we said, we're going to focus mainly, since it's applicable to current society and what we deal with. We're focusing on mainly the Islamic extremism and what might be done, maybe getting into their heads a little bit and finding out what we could do to at least decrease the problem. So I want to identify at least the top 5. This is on nationalinterest.org. They have an article called Washington Watching the 5 Deadliest Terrorist Groups. So these, according to Washington, are the 5 biggest groups on their radar. And number 1 is, no surprise, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, also known as ISIL, aka ISIS, BKA, the Islamic State. So that, I think, needs no introduction or explanation there. We're all familiar with them. Number 2, Boko Haram, or Haram, however it's pronounced again, jihadist group in northeastern Nigeria, catapulted, it says, to the world's attention when a boarding school in a Nigerian border town of Chibok was raided in the middle of the night. Around 300 schoolgirls were taken captive, which is pathetically disgusting for anyone to do. And I think we would all agree with that, and so would Ariana Grande, for sure. Let's see here. Number 3 they have listed is Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the QUDS Force, Quds Force. Covert External Operations Wing of the Elite Revolutionary Guard, it says. Although it does mention that they're not designated a foreign terrorist organization by the government. But it does say it's a highly secretive branch of the Islamic Republic that's ruthless and harms a lot of civilians. Number 4, Haqqani Network, HAQQANI, designated as a terrorist organization 2012, very lethal in Western culture and society. And number 5 is Kataib, it says Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is the better known term for that organization, which again probably needs no explanation. So those are the 5 that mostly we are sort of dealing with. And then obviously there's the lone wolf terrorist that we can probably talk about here in a bit. You gonna say something?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
So those are the 5. So I want to ask the 3 of you guys. Will, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Why these 5 organizations? Why do you think they do what they do? I know it's going to be like a record, repeating record or whatever, but.
Well, I think some of them, I think, are doing it clearly because they do a big portion of your Islamic terrorist organizations, and their cause is their religion, is wanting to spread have the government bodies be run by the Islamic State or the Islamic religion. But there are others that like one that's not. I guess they have been a lot less active recently, but one that's not on the list would be Al Qaeda. And they weren't starting off just as Islamic terrorists. They started off protecting their own country from the Soviets, and then the resulting victory from that or whatever led to the jihad movement, the holy war movement, and then they found their opportunity to kind of start picking on us when they wanted the U.S. Armed Forces out of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf War. They weren't too. I mean, they aren't real happy with us trying to play world police in the Middle East, you know. So they're
Right.
trying to, you know, let us do our thing. But I think some of them definitely start out like trying to just. Some of them do start out as protectors, or you know, they're you know, not protectors, but as agents of their state, as agents
Yeah.
of their government, and then it just kind of goes out of control and goes from there. And they adopt these crazy beliefs of, you know, well, if you're not Muslim, if you don't follow the Islamic faith, then you're better off dead. So you know, might
Now,
as well
you
make
mentioned
it
a
that way.
passage right earlier about that.
Yeah, the fact that you know, the only the people saying that the Quran teaches terrorism is basically the only two groups that are really going to say that are going to be your anti-Muslim pundits, and then your extremists themselves are going to tell you that the Quran teaches terrorism, because they're going to want to be able to try and say
justifies it,
exactly.
yeah,
They
right.
want to try and justify it, but the passages they're just cherry picking passages that are out of context and making it seem. I mean, that's all you really have to do is take something out of context, throw it on a screen, and be intimidating
Yeah,
about
you
it.
can
and
do
suddenly,
that.
yeah, people
with
are
anything,
believing you.
You know, you can do that with a Disney film, probably.
You probably could if you really wanted
Queen
to,
Ursula
yeah.
said this, so that's, you know, the way
That's
we
how-
show it.
right.
And that gets back into the question of why they do it, and I'll come back to that in my opinion of why they do it. But all right. So Chad, what do you think? Why do terrorists terrorize?
Why do terrorize?
Or a multitude, if there's several
Yeah,
reasons.
I mean, there is. I've read quite a bit. I've consumed a lot on the subject, but still hard to pin down. I've heard lots of reasons, probably a grain of truth in a lot of it, or you know, probably a couple grains more in some than others, but.
There is no right
There's-
or wrong. By the way.
yeah,
There's no
right.
right or wrong answer to this.
Yeah,
There's-
there is certainly an apathetic nature that can be derived from anybody that follows any kind of religion. I think that just a view, even from inside Western culture, it's not hard to see that promoting liberty and freedom of choice is a mess and lacks a lot of structure.
Yeah, actually, on that point, you referenced, I want to bring back a point you made earlier when we were talking, I think, before we started recording, about how Eastern culture views Western culture, and maybe that resentment has fostered maybe some of these views of animosity in terms of what we prioritize in our lives and whatnot. So could you elaborate on that, what you said earlier?
I would, you know, I had a discussion with somebody who was saying, well, jihad is only waged against people who are not, you know, quote, of the faith, and which meant you pretty much trying to umbrella it under all Abrahamic religions, which is just a very disingenuous take on it, because I was like, well, you know, just take it from me, I would tell a person that thought that, like, first of all, it's kind of suggesting you can kill atheists and it'd be okay, but
Valid point.
you know, I would just straight up tell
What about
okay,
agnostics?
well, then I am your, yeah, give him time. He needs a little
Right, yeah.
Let him think about
He'll
it.
come around, you know.
But, you know, I would just straight up tell somebody like that, well, I am the, what is it, a kafir? Or I think it's pronounced kafir, right?
CAFFER, maybe.
I think it's a K. I'm
Kind
not
of
sure.
shot in the dark.
It's
What is it? Yeah, what does it mean?
Well, I don't I don't believe that Muhammad is the prophet of God, right? So it's like immediately I would take that argument apart and say, okay, well, I'm pigeonholing you into this scenario
gotcha.
where
Okay.
I am this person who is. There's all kinds of words. I feel like it's like a kafir, an apostate, and an infidel. You know.
Yeah.
Just I'm all of them. So.
Semantics, right? Yeah.
I would become disposable to a person who would be an extremist. Right.
So this is kind of, you're saying this is why they...
I'm in the way. I'm an object to be overcome.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of elaborate on that, what you said earlier, I mean, there was a lot of, you did mention a lot of the, things in Western culture that, and we kind of joked about it, but you look at our culturally significant individuals, right? We've got Catch Me Outside, how about that? We got Kim Kardashian, we've got, how many people, like, why do we...
They're not wrong.
Why? Well, I'm not saying, but we do have a very material view, and we prioritize and reward. And capitalism is the law of the land, so that's got a lot to do with it. But I mean, has that created a lot of different issues within our culture? And then maybe they resent that, And there's just a lot of, like I said, moving parts to why they do these things. But Michael, what do you think? Why do you think terrorists terrorize?
To me, it seems to be coming down to mainly a structural base, because we have basically a completely different structure for our government and views in the West than they do in the East. East with how they seem to be more based more on theocracy and having religious laws
there's not a separation of church and state kind of deal, right?
Well, we have a separation of church and state, and they don't see that as a good thing, because it gives us the ability to essentially create chaos amongst ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. The whole structure thing, you mentioned that earlier too when we were discussing before the recording. But yeah, it was kind of, you said it's I think you said organized chaos, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's something to do. It's a right of kind of
Yeah, it's with the chaos that we bring out of our good, it causes chaos for them.
Mm-hmm.
And because what we think we're doing as good could be ruining their economy or their views. It was when we try to forcefully bring democracy into their world.
And I will say, if anybody did the research, this isn't a secret or anything. It's a lot of bar talk, but you don't see a lot of it in the mainstream. But there's a lot more of that going on in the world than people want to admit. Say what you want about conspiracy theorists, but it's real. It's going on. There's a lot of stuff. We don't know the majority of the stuff that does happen. I'm convinced of that. And there's a very specific reason for that. If we knew the truth, in fact, it was back. When they started the Federal Reserve, for example, I forget who. I think it was Henry Ford said it. He was if people truly knew the nature of the Federal Reserve System, there would be rioting in the streets. And the agenda behind it, why they introduced it. We're going to talk about that again later on another episode about conspiracies and whatnot. But yeah, you're right. And I think that kind of segues into my answer to that of why they do it. And one, you can't. There is no the answer to that. Everybody has different reasons. That's life in general. But I think a lot of it does have to do. There are the religious, crazy, whatever people that you're not going to be able to convince them anyway. But I agree with Chad said earlier. Most people, and this is Carson's point of view in the book. I kind of relate to that about how most people, in my opinion, inherently understand what's right and wrong in general. Like I said, it's pretty obvious that blowing people up you don't know and that don't deserve it, it's wrong.
Yeah.
You shouldn't do that. So why, I have to ask myself, why do they do it? What could drive somebody to do that? And I think a lot of it, more than we probably want to admit in the Western, world, is retaliatory. We do, and this has to do with some of the conspiracy stuff, but we do kind of get meddled into their affairs, their governments. We try to, oust certain people. We try to install other people and control their society. Mm-hmm. And we have and a lot of it has to do with oil. A lot of it has to do with energy, that whole deal. But
it's a lot of money-based corruption.
Yeah, it is. It's that all of these different moving parts are what's contributing to this massive resentment of the world, of the Western world. And that's kind of probably to me the most prevalent issue is how much we really get in their way. I have to ask, and I have to wonder if we weren't doing like any of that, or if we were doing maybe a little fraction of it, would we see as much terrorism in general? What do you think, Chad?
Not because I'm on board with what you're saying. I do think that's a very commonly said argument that our involvement inspires a lot, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but I do think there's a lot more there.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Like in Belgium had government signs just welcoming with open arms, people
Refugees
from the Middle East, and there was a bloody massacre there. And it was just kind of, it was like, what? There is something else going on there. I do believe, right out that Islam can coexist with the West.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Just a fleeting thought within that. So I agree with that. I agree that it's a cultural problem, and regardless of how much intervention we have, that it is the culture, and that is the norm. It happened in Germany too, when they rapes and stuff. And again, it goes back to the treatment of women. Right, exactly. It makes no sense. But my question would be, to play devil's advocate, and I'm not arguing for terrorism. Obviously, I'm saying good and bad things here. We were talking about the women and all that. But just to be devil's advocate, do you think though that culture would exist regardless of what else is going on in the world, or do you think it is all the stem of that culture is coming from religion, or do you think if less of that kind of stuff was going on, that less people would interpret the Quran, for example, in such a aggressive way? Because again, I think a lot of it has to do with them justifying their own agenda and what they want to do, which probably has a lot of like I said, retaliate. So do you think that a lot of that would that be at least lessened?
They're probably lessened at least. I am a Christian. I'm not coming at this from a they're wrong, I'm right kind of a way.
Right.
And I feel like that is a pretty common argument that's made,
mm-hmm.
and it's not that. That's why I do believe that the West and Islam it does coexist to a great extent, clearly, and so that's not my argument.
You do a good job of objectivity. That's actually one of the reasons I liked you as a guest, because you're very objective and you do consider both sides.
Well, I appreciate.
So I will applaud you for that. But continue. Sorry. You're talking about how they coexist and.
Yeah, what was the original question? I apologize.
Would it be lessened if there was less intervention, for example?
Yeah.
And you referenced the Belgian thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great question of our age, and
mm-hmm.
I appreciate you having the conversation, because it's a very taboo conversation.
It is,
and it's frustrating. America in the '60s had to have a Martin Luther King Jr., right?
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't have a white Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
He needed to be black.
Yeah.
He did.
He's representative of the population that needed to be uplifted.
I do believe there is beyond even extremism and terrorism. I do believe that there's a cultural issue that is a problem. There's a lack of values that is being displayed in the Middle East.
So just to, if I'm interpreting what you just said correctly, the solution, at least whatever, there's no solution to this. There's always going to be crazy people, obviously. The point is to how do we mitigate this problem? You think the issue is going to have to be solved from within,
right?
And it's going to have to be within the Muslim community,
right? And there are movements. There are Muslim Reformation movements, which I believe, and it's good to check out that stuff and promote it. And a lot of things I hear is you won't hear this on the news as a caption with there was a bunch of people Muslims in London who gathered to
peace activists and whatnot.
Yeah, and in response to the person saying this is not who we are. We condemn this act
or something.
Yeah, and so, but my thing is that's a great thing to do, and I appreciate that. That's needed. However, if it's not going to be reported, that's a part of your problem. That's not a part of the problem that you're going to deal with. It's not maybe something that you're doing wrong, but it's an obstacle, another obstacle that you have
to
more,
right?
Overcome.
I agree with that. That's a very insightful point. Right. Is and the whole Martin Luther King thing is an excellent analogy that applies perfectly to this.
And I don't want to say that there was I'm equating this to
civil rights.
Black people needed to have an evolution.
Don't feel the need to isn't the whole point of this whole thing is to be open and talk objectively without disrespect, without predispositions and bias, at least for as much as we can, because these are very serious issues and they're not talked about because of the fear of offending people and political incorrectness. And I cannot stand that because we're basically prioritizing people's feelings, the snowflake type mentality, over lives, because this is a very serious problem and it's not talked about to the extent or to the, people are so closed-minded. The whole point is to be open-minded and consider these things. So that is a perfect analogy with that. I agree with that. I think it's going to have to come because it's very difficult for me let's see, what would be a good... So I was in insurance. It would be very difficult for me to listen to a banker, for example, on how to sell insurance. Right. He hasn't done it. He's not me. He doesn't get my struggle, Right. So I agree. I think it's going to have to come from within Muslim leadership. And you're right. If it's not reported, why isn't it? I don't see much on Facebook about it. Could there be more done to make that so loud where it actually commits change?
Right. You have to recognize that as a problem itself and tackle that just as much as the other problem.
You can't. It's easy to blame the media, right?
Right.
Do something about it. Become your own media. Do whatever it takes to solve the problem. Which is the next. Actually, Mike, was there anything else you wanted to add on that about why they do it, or you mentioned the whole structure thing? Was that?
Yeah, because we have gone in and sort of destroyed their structure as well. Oh, because between the 70s where we overthrew someone we didn't like in Iraq and Iran, and which led to Al Qaeda forming into a terrorist group, and to where because we had a major as the U.S. government, it's not the U.S. people, had a major cause of Al Qaeda becoming a terrorist group, because at first we funded them, and then we took those funds away. And once they started going against what we thought was
there's a cat here. If anybody hears it, I'm just going to throw that out there in case we don't edit this out.
Yeah,
we're going to have an episode on animals anyway later on, so get used to it.
Yep, lots of cats.
Yeah, but that's a good point. So and that kind of goes back to the what is it, the chicken or the egg? Who's causing it? Is it the intervention? Is it the culture? Whatever.
And even with that question for which came first, the chicken or egg, it was the egg, but from a different bird.
That's very Confucius like. Yeah, very insightful. I don't even understand really.
It's evolution.
Yeah.
Everything evolves from something that came before it.
It's ironic to mention that in a religious discussion, though. I agree. Right, yeah.
Well, there was a evolutionary point or I was thinking something evolutionary, religions talk about the whole man and woman thing. I wonder how that stands up in an evolutionary standpoint, because men are very, as far as being domineering, we're very disposable.
Yeah,
compared to the female.
I mean, you go to the bar and you find that out in a heartbeat. It's they got the pig. It's you got to do everything you can. It's not I'm not saying that's something we do, but that's the whole point. It's a joke. It's guys got to improve. You got to impress the women.
That's.
You're right. They have the control.
It's even in nature you see that,
because
it's the men who are all colorful, while the women are the background colors, because they have to be the most protective.
We got a peacock.
They,
for lack of a better word,
they harbor children.
Yeah.
That's so important
There would be no us without the ability to, and they can do that with any guy in the world. Why,
it's very important for them to choose well,
It's mostly physical, I think. Physical domineering. And it honestly is the male ego. That's the problem. It's the alpha male instinct to want to domineer and be in control. I mean, I think it's an inherent instinctual characteristic that is displayed throughout the animal kingdom.
Right.
The one male that's always the alpha is the one that will do whatever it takes to, and you see this with I mean, it's literally on a higher cognitive level. You see the same behavior. The apes that's beating up the other apes, that's doing the stuff that we would, ethics would dictate as bad. They're the ones in control. They're the ones getting the chicks, Politics, the people, I mean, House of Cards, Bill Clinton made a comment about how real that show is. He was, laughing about it, but it was actually kind of scary.
Yeah.
Because, watching the show, but, look at that. Frank Underwood pushing the journalist in front of the trial. They'll do stuff, most people won't, and what happens? They become president.
Right.
It's literally the same animalistic behavior, just manifested in a different way.
Actually, we can even, do that with, the current presidency, because Trump, he may not have always had the best political presence, but he was the loudest and most aggressive out of every person. And look at him now; he is the president.
I know. I will say. I mean, we've talked about him before, and we try to stay not as central as we can. But the guy wins.
Yeah.
People hate him. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what I think of the guy. He confuses the hell out of me every other day. Kofefi. Can we pause here just to pay homage to the term Kofefi?
That's my favorite.
What does that mean?
That's the point, man. He's got us all boggled. It's and while we're thinking about what Kofefi means, he's probably doing his own thing, planning his next moves.
It's one of three things. It's
gotta be an acronym.
It's a Russian code for something.
Is this true, or you just
totally not true? Totally not true.
Okay.
I'm liking this.
Or it's a mix between two different Pokemon. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Oh, that's my favorite so far.
Or he passed out on Ambien mid-tweet.
Or a stroke.
Yeah. See, I thought it was an acronym at first. I was trying to give the guy credit, but I think
at least had a sense of
I think it
humor.
was totally option number 3 there.
Yeah.
Or Melania was getting a little comfy with him in the bed, and he was just let things trail off. Maybe the dog ran over his keyboard and typed it. The Baxter does that all the time with my blogs. He'll walk over my keyboard, Yeah. And but yeah, I've never said Kofifi, but hey,
right.
I have an iPhone that autocorrects. Who knows what he's got?
I wonder if it does autocorrect too.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So Kofifi, this episode sponsored by Kofifi. Anyway. So, the final thing I want to talk about, and this is the most important thing to stick with our brand, how the world should work, is what can we do? What can we do to tangible action, activity, and I'll start this for context. I mean, this is my main, right now, based on the level, we're, for all intents and purposes, I'm nobody, right? I'm not like Trump where I've got a big platform. So, we have to start somewhere, and getting this dialogue going and creating awareness is the first step. We mentioned it last time, a podcast becomes an organization becomes a movement becomes a new way of living. That's really the snowball. It's got to start somewhere.
Right.
So what do you think, Will? What do you think we can do?
To lessen it?
We're never going to solve this.
Yeah, no.
We need to understand, but yeah, to lessen it, to help the world.
To lessen it, I think something we said earlier was a lot of the more political reasons for terrorism happening and the way they pick their targets is, for us, like we said, we just irritated them. We just rubbed them the wrong way one too many times, and finally they kind of snapped, and now we are in this, more than a decade-long war on terror. And I think part of how we lessen it is we do kind of pull ourselves away from the Middle East a little bit. We tie up as many loose ends as we can, and I'm not saying we pull out of it completely, because I feel like at this point we've kind of written ourselves into it a tiny bit.
Couldn't even get out. Yeah.
But I do think our presence in the Middle East, militarily at least, because we can protect our borders. We are fully capable of that.
Right.
we can see a plane coming from 400 miles away and not have, and have it intercepted by the time it's 350 miles away. Like, it can be taken care of.
Probably more than that.
No, exactly. So
but why do we
a lot more than that?
Like,
but we police the world, and I mean, a lot of times it is because in recent history people have, or at least since the World Wars, where we kind of made it known that we can go from being isolated from everybody there, and then just kind of step in and
destroying
end it.
you all.
We can, when we step in, it ends or whatever.
But so stop there. Like America's become the world's Trump.
Kind of.
Our ego is so big. We decided we need to control everyone.
Because there are people that get angry when you say we shouldn't police the world, and I'm just like, well, but we should. Because I mean, we don't waste our resources necessarily doing that, because there are people we save, and it does sometimes benefit the greater good of us. But a lot of times we need to. I mean, I think to just get myself to stop from rambling. To lessen it, to at least take a little bit of pressure off of the world when it comes to terror. I think we keep doing what we're doing, which is we do kind of hunt down and weed out the higher ranking, more dangerous aspects of these organizations. I do think the singular organizations themselves we could target. We could, we don't have to go to war, or we don't have to occupy the whole country just to go after a certain organization. Now, ISIS, for instance, I mean, they've captured a lot of points over, all
excellent
over the place.
Marketers.
They are great marketers.
They really are.
They get the job done when it comes to getting their name out there. But they went through and started capturing the country.
Yeah.
So, they could not have fought back ISIS themselves. They needed a little bit of help. But they're
literally a trend. I mean, they've created a trend. It's cool.
It is cool to become.
It's the thing to do, and it's a movement. Like you said, it's structure for them.
Yeah.
Michael said it.
It's like becoming part of a club.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, it literally is good marketing. I mean, it's, granted, you're killing people, but
you're doing that. But other than that, you've got a brotherhood. So there's.
But less is more. It sounds
less is more. I think less U.S. involvement, less world involvement. I think. Plenty of European countries are in the Middle East too. We're not the only country there. We do a lot more, broadcasting and newscasting than a lot of other countries do. But plenty of other countries from the United Nations have their feet in the Middle East somehow.
Yeah.
But
mostly because we do, though.
Yeah,
most of them are dependent in one way or the other.
I think our giant. Size 14 footstep needs to be taken, needs to be just a footstep. There doesn't need to be
maybe
foot
a slipper.
in it. Maybe a slipper. Yeah. I realize that something like that won't happen quickly. It takes a long time to pull people like that out. And even if I don't feel like with where things are politically in America right now, we will anytime soon.
That's the question. How do we get to that point?
Yeah. I think, quite honestly, you need to change your mindset, and your administration is not currently the proper administration for that, in my opinion.
We need to change the world, man.
Yeah, so,
literally. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we can focus on that at a later point.
That's
the
long-term goal. Chad, what do you think? What can we do?
I don't like zero-sum games. So I don't like saying, because I'm going to say some things that are counter to what you're saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
However, it doesn't mean that what you're saying doesn't have a valuable role, right? From my perspective,
You'd be
I
an
do
excellent
believe it does.
politician.
I know.
I understand and appreciate your
You
point.
almost don't say that happily.
However.
I know.
It's
No, he's very empathetic. I appreciate it.
That's good.
because there's value in what you're saying for sure, and I understand it. I don't think we've seen enough. I don't know. It's hard to say because what you're saying sounds a lot like the previous administration with Obama and a lead from behind. Unfortunately, the Middle East, how I see it, is the world's chessboard. It's an unfortunate truth. Geopolitics, for me, I view it as an unfortunate truth or present, reality. And unfortunately, I don't know if there's a great speech that I would not tarnish your podcast by quoting, but if you've seen Team America, there's a great
By all means, quote away. I love that movie.
I would like my family to hear this podcast. So, but it's probably one of the most concise geopolitical speeches.
Which one? We're gonna watch this.
The speech is given twice.
Because Johnny hasn't seen it.
The speech is given twice.
Oh, I know exactly which one you're referring to.
Yes.
That speech.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote that is a god.
It's so. In other words, what we've in the Middle East, there's as far as extremism for me, I have a problem with Trump with a lot of things. One of them I do actually applauded was when he just called them losers.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like
He was simplifying it,
that
man.
was- yeah,
he was like,
It
whatever.
was they're just losers, and there'll always be losers in this life, and that was it was undignifying, which is when he said calling them monsters would be
That's what they're looking for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it pisses them off because that's an ego thing. It's like you're not even you're just losers, dudes.
You can't
Yeah.
even be
He knows
evil,
how to.
right?
I mean,
Like,
he
come
knows how to
on.
push
Yeah.
buttons.
No.
'Cause
I think with America, we have a responsibility to keep ourselves in check morally as a people, because because we are a very powerful force in the world, and that's and like I said earlier, the world is shrinking.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I like the idea of isolationism. Isolationism.
There you go.
Is that the word?
That's right.
Okay.
Like exclusivity, kind of
Like
communal.
pre World
Ron
War
Paul.
One America
Right,
was
okay.
very isolationist. Yeah.
I like that idea too. We talked about it last time.
Yeah, and so I like that. If we could do that and everything would be hunky dory, that's fine. I think it does neglect the consequences would not be do the pros outweigh the cons there, because what we've seen is I think the smartest person in the world right now is on the political stage playing the chess game is Putin.
Putin, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
That's. I think everybody would agree with that. For the
So
most part.
he's the ninja to Trump's bull. So who knows how that's going to work out?
Yeah.
And so I think when America recedes,
When America recedes, I'd like to point that comment out because that's a very common sentiment. When America recedes, and I feel like you said this last time, it's coming quickly. But sorry, continue. I just wanted to point that out because that's a big comment, important comment.
for lack of a better word, or exactly the word I'm looking for, evil will prevail. And I say that because, and that's why I say we have to keep ourselves morally in check, and we have to elect good people, because
Unless
we become
somebody in America or West, whatever, wherever else, that's good, takes over. I mean, and combats that. Do you think Putin is like the next kind of? Are you saying that he's synonymous with that evil, just just for clarity?
I think he's evil. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think it's right.
He's complicated, man. I don't know.
I don't think he's.
I know
well-intentioned
we're fed.
whatsoever,
I know we're
to be
fed a
entirely
lot
honest,
of negative stuff about him. I don't necessarily, because a lot of Russian people that I've spoken to, that like I went to college with, love the guy. You know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to sift through the crap we're fed through the media. You know.
I'm willing to
Because all of our perspectives are based off of what? Have any of us ever talked to the guy?
No.
You know? Have you
Yeah,
ever
but
watch
information is
honestly
more
watch
relevant.
videos of the guy? Watch videos and listen to what he says and why he says it.
He carries himself very well.
He's
does.
very well spoken,
very
but I
well
mean,
spoken.
I agree
Yeah.
with a lot of the things that he says. He has a lot of problems with.
It's just.
I think we have a very big problem in America of looking in the mirror. I hate to say it. It's going to piss off a lot of listeners probably, but it's true. I mean, I think we have a really bad problem with lack of self-awareness.
I think maybe even sometimes we're over introspective at times as well. It's a weird duality there. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, in
I
terms
do
of-
agree that there's a brassness about America that is
Holier than
unbecoming.
thou, you know?
Yeah. However, there is the other side of that is to internally beat the hell out of ourselves, and so
Okay.
there's somewhere in between. There's a charm in being introspective, and there's also a charm to being outgoing.
Right.
So,
But do you think we
balance it,
beat
right?
ourselves up over the right things? That
That's
would
a
be
good
my
question.
question. And the reason I say that is because my mom was. I mean, she's why I wrote the book. She did, why I even care about any of this. She was like the most benevolent human being, and she always would tell me that that's really the main component of a good, knowledgeable person is perspective. I mean, that was the word and it's the ability to honestly shed your ego, get over yourself and your opinions, and really, really connect with the other person's point of view and how they view it. You know, because ultimately we're all the other person to someone else, to everyone else, right?
Yeah, sure.
So, and that's really the only thing. So I think, I don't know. I mean, Johnny said this last time. It was a really good point about technology, and even like today with the prevalence of social media and how a lot of people unfortunately get their news from it. That's all tailored to exacerbate your own opinions.
Right.
You know, their algorithms and whatnot, they know what you read, so they feed it to you and they continue it. So you don't get those other points of view. So that's really
You have
the
to
thing.
actively seek that out, and that's
So,
it's important to do.
but before, and I don't want to get on so, but Michael, what do you think? What do you think? We're kind of talking about high level stuff. What do you think we can do?
Yeah.
Like tomorrow, I'm saying. Like, what can we actually... It's easy, because when we say it that way, we're really never going to do it, because we know what the end game is. What's the plan? How do we get there?
That's actually what I was like planning to like say on. Like,
Sorry. We can edit that out.
yeah.
My bad. I'm trying to proctor the conversation about, direct whatever.
Yeah. But
Continue.
so what I think we need like another movement like with Dr. Luther King. Like, we need to get like people, like common people together, get their voices out, get them heard, get them to be loud like these big politicians like Trump. Like, have a common person as loud as a political majority. So that we can have like these problems out in the open, so that we
So
can...
how do we do that?
Well,
It's always, there's another layer that's going to always boil down to it. It's like, how do we do it,
that's like the problem is because the only way to do it, like, currently would be through social media, but that's also a problem because then, like, we get bogged down by everything else.
Right. Bombarded, everybody's overloaded with...
So, unless we get, like, everyone focused on a single, mission, we're never going to be able to, like, get this actually done. So we need to, like, get everyone, like, which is a lot easier said than done because first, how many million people in America? Few hundred million?
340 maybe, or less. That's updated by now. You're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, you're exactly, literally, pretty much taking the words out of my mouth. I mean, you're right. The problem, the really common denominator to all of this, is we have to care. That's the problem. Is we need to care. We need a people to get a voice that care.
And like, if I can say something like for terrorists that like is honestly a bit respectful, is that they do get people to care about what's happening.
That's true.
They've got more conviction than anyone.
Yeah, like
They kill themselves.
they're
over their
really,
convictions.
Like, they're willing to sacrifice their lives for what they believe in.
And other people's lives.
And other people.
How many people do we know in America, and do we really that would do that?
Yeah.
That care so much about anything other than their own life.
Yeah. Like, who in America is like, if they were introspective enough, is actually willing to step in front of a bullet to save someone else?
Who is that homeless guy in Manchester that ran towards the explosion at that concert? How many of those do we have? I can't think of any.
I've met one.
Who?
It was a homeless guy in Chicago, and like all of his money that he collected went towards his cat.
Wow.
The cat,
Good for him.
Yeah, like he had like his entire bag was filled with cat food, and the cat had the softest fur and like was extremely well taken care of.
To that point, and I'll be honest, some of the smartest people I've ever spoken to are homeless.
Yeah.
You know what? Because they don't care about what society tells them to care about.
Yeah.
They honestly don't. So they don't prescribe to our common way of doing anything. But I mean, to answer, if I were to answer that, we got to care more in this. I mean, the only way to do this is to start the dialogue somewhere. And that's why, I mean, when I named the blog, that's what all this started out with, was my blog. After I wrote the book, I was like thinking, well, what do I name the blog? And the whole point of it is to talk about this stuff, and that's why I named it How the World. I mean, that's really what it is. That, for me, is my Martin Luther King version of, because that's the problem. The world sucks. The world doesn't work in the right, And I feel like, I mean, it's always been like that, but I mean, surely something can be done to at least fix some of it. It's never going to be perfect. We're never going to have utopia. We get that.
Right.
But I mean, there's got to be more.
How can we make it better, at least?
I mean, how can we make things better and more, for everyone?
emboldening people. I would say that there's more people that would fit the criteria of a person that would take a bullet than you would probably think.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, that's why I like the Walking Dead so much, is because it totally tears the veil off of the veil people have over their character.
It's just who you
and this
are.
is like, this is who
Right.
you are.
Right.
We get to see it. And so
Like it's
to talk,
inspiring,
as
you know?
dumb as they are, and that's one of I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson, and one of his big things, he's like, it's a miracle that we even have civil discussions just based on humanity's evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And just about how crazy just the universe in general is. So it's like it's quite a miracle, and we often expect people to have super articulate things to say, and if they don't, they're dumb. It's like, well, we're all kind of forming these ideas, and I think that conversations like this are good. We're not going to get. I don't believe in appeasing people with ill intentions. You know, I don't believe in putting up with it.
Yeah. Okay.
I
No
don't think that
tolerance.
like tolerating bad behavior is
Shenanigans.
is
Right.
going to profit anything for anybody,
Yeah.
even the people that are causing the shenanigans. So that
You know,
would-
the biggest problem is political correctness.
Yeah. right?
The representative of the voice for people that get offended about everything. That's political correctness is why people don't talk about this.
right.
Really,
That's what I'm
because they're
saying. Is
afraid-
encourage people, which is what you're doing, and I applaud you for that. And so, you know, for people to have conversations is good, I believe.
Yeah. And I wish there was, you know, I don't know. And like I said, the answer to me is this, and then the more of this that gets out, the more of the other people that are like, hey, let's, you know, that's a good idea. Maybe they'll start their own thing, and then it'll just catch on and catch on,
Snowball.
just like ISIS.
You know, a great way to end that
If
sentence.
ISIS can do it, my point, if they can freaking do it, we can do it.
Right.
You
Yes,
know? I mean, come on. And
Right.
we're fighting for good. They're fighting
Right.
for evil, you know? From our point of view, of course. But yeah, I mean, we've got a good product we're selling. It's like, how hard can it be?
It is hard to sell good product, though.
That's
It is.
true. That is true.
Sell a vegetable, you know, sell a carrot in a bakery,
Sell a carrot, that's a valid point.
That's
yeah.
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 but you can do it. You know?
Yeah, it can be done with the right amount of effort. And again, it all boils down to how much we care.
Right.
You know, are we willing
And
to...
how much we get other people to care.
Yeah,
to
are
be
we willing to
honest.
put up with the crap to, you know, scratching away until we, you know, get a platform and everything. So that's actually a good way to close, or at least segue into the plan moving forward with this when we get the nonprofit, the 501c3 status and whatnot. We're in the process right now. Johnny the Gentleman actually is developing a way to for enrollment. Really, our first plan, what we're going to do is partner with other organizations that basically fit the bill. I mean, how the world should work. Other nonprofits that are doing, like American Heart Association, for example, Habitat for Humanity is one, where we're going to create a membership base of people involved that want to do something tangible to help the world and make a difference. So what we're going to do is create a database just organically from our listeners and social media and everything. It's going to start here and hopefully grow, but of people that would be willing to be involved in things like this, or volunteering things, blood drives, you know, building homes for homeless people, anything. And you get the point of anything that's benefiting the collective, you know. So that we're in the process. So we'll be announcing that whenever we get that, you know, that system established or whatnot. And then from there, the sky's the limit. I mean, you know, hopefully this will take off and we'll get a lot of participation and whatnot. And thank you. I want to thank you guys again, Michael and Chad, for doing this. You know, I'm looking forward. Hopefully we'll have some other collaborations in the future. I know we're going to have some repeat guests and whatnot in some of the podcasts. So
Thank you for having me.
yeah, by all means, man. I do want to mention, I try to kind of give people shout out too that participate here on social media, and I did actually ask people kind of the same question. I actually want to start with an old high school class cat mate of mine. And I want to start out with an old high school classmate of mine, Jackie Bertel. She's an attorney now in Las Vegas. I'd be lying if I said I was not jealous of her, but But I want to start out by referencing Jackie saw the post on Facebook that I posed to our members and listeners. I said, one more question before we record with Mr. Chad Grindstaff. Do you think it's worth the attempt to view terrorism and the atrocities we've seen recently from the perspective of the assailant? That is there a possibility that there are other factors outside of the, quote, they're crazy explanation, or do you think extremists are beyond the point of shifting views? And she sent me a paper that she had written, I'm assuming as part of her college curriculum, that, very to the point, the title of the paper was Suicide Bombers. And she actually, it's a 22-page document, a very insightful document about that very thing, and empathizing, getting inside of, their mind. And there's a quote in here, her closing paragraph, kind of her thoughts on the whole ordeal, is this. Based upon the understanding that suicide bombers have a different understanding of life and their religion, an attempt should be made to understand this difference, rather than classify it as different, or evil, or wrong, or unjust. Although there is no immediate solution to the situation involving suicide bombing, it is imperative that people take steps to understanding the situation surrounding suicide bombers, specifically their religion. After all, understanding one's religion can often go hand in hand with understanding one's actions, which is a very good point and, correlates perfectly with our discussion here. But we had some other responses, a lot of responses here actually, but Mike Hart, an old coworker of mine, said historically when one force vastly overpowers another, either through technology or numbers, the lesser force employs guerrilla tactics and strategy. Targeting non-combatants, quote, terrorism, is one of these strategies. And that opened a can of worms, and there's a long list of comments after that he elaborated on that. But he mentioned that it's not instinctual to attack non-combatants, but it is instinctual to use whatever methods deemed acceptable by combatants of the lesser force. So basically, they'll do what they have to. Chad, our guest here, actually chimed in here. He said, would it be comparable to suggest this is like defanging a predator? This is in response to Mike's comment that the more impersonal technology we bring to bear, the more brutal they will become in their methodology. I'm assuming referring to like drone strikes and whatnot. But as someone, preferably local military, must meet ISIS on the field of battle and defeat them conventionally. So Chad's response would be, would it be comparable to suggest this is like defanging a predator? I think I'm understanding what you're saying. Just clarifying. Mike's response to that, no problem. I'm not being an apologist for terrorism. And he's basically just saying it's important to understand, his quote, these awful jackasses, why they're doing all this, and that's the only way to quell the brutality, which I agree with. So thank everybody for participating and for offering their thoughts. Again, thank you, Chad. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Will. Moving forward, Will be more involved. He's going to be an officer right now on the nonprofit committee, and more. We'll get to that more on that later. But as always, to end this chat, I'm going to conclude with a poem. It was hard to write a poem about terrorism, I have to be honest. This morning I'd actually forgotten. I was like, I forgot to write a poem. And then I thought, I was like, how do you write a poem on terrorism?
Right.
So, because usually I think of poetry as like elegant and like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
In terrorism, yeah, I mean, you're right. Look at Poe. I mean, Poe talked
right?
about some sadistic stuff, and he's one of my favorite poets
Same.
ever. Nevermore.
Better.
Huh?
All the better.
Yeah.
Turn savagery into beauty.
Pit and the Pendulum, man. You gotta be a tortured guy to write that.
I say for like terrorism, you have to be a bit chaotic in your poem.
You're right. Well, I took a more delicate approach. I didn't really go into the brutal, oh man, talking about femininity earlier, right? So the title is called This Terrifying World, and it goes like this. Chaos, madness, we've deafened this place, when quality of life is sadly debased. Around any corner lie those that await, who wish only harm, that death is your fate. Perhaps for a god, an ideal, or revenge. Perhaps for their loved ones, the dead they avenge. I fear that this terror shall oft persevere until the day dawns when we all lend an ear, a time when the world sets pause to the hate, where perspective arises and opens the gate of our minds, our thoughts, and our views, when people are people and differences diffused. So that was my attempt at terrorism poetry. So, thank everyone for listening. Please subscribe, like, comment, everything on the iTunes link. We're going to be available on SoundCloud and YouTube in the near future. Again, thank you guys, and until next week.